G'day legends, I hope you're having a fantastic day and so far you are having a brilliant weekend. Now legends, of course as always we do have a lot to go over and a lot of what we're going to be looking at today is Pokrovsk, the situation that is deteriorating in that pocket. That pocket has been formed over many months, but it does seem to be coming to a close fairly quickly, well, relatively quickly. So, of course, we'll be looking at that. But we can't talk about Pokrovsk today without speaking about this GUR, Ukraine's intelligence service, military intelligence, a special operations forces mission by UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters into that area, something that we do not see often at all. There are many reasons why we don't see helicopters operating on or behind the lines at the front lines, especially in broad daylight. And we're going to look at that operation. We're going to look at my take on it, like what's just screaming to me. And I was a former infantryman, no, not in these sort of units, but still I think I have a better bearing on the difficulties of these operations than many on this platform. We'll talk about that. We'll look at the maps in Pokrovsk, look at the situations, look at some apparently successful withdrawals. We'll look at the maps in other areas. We'll talk about Tomahawks and we'll actually talk about the Signals Directorate as well. So a lot to go over as well. So let's just start here and then we'll get into that chopper mission and Pokrovsk. Now, for my Australian audience, you may have seen this in the news, you may not have, but this is very interesting. As a former Australian Signals Directorate employee, so under the ASD, a highly secure and classified area, part of our overall intelligence apparatus, a man, US, has been accused of selling trade secrets to a Russian buyer for almost $2 million, used to work for Australia, ASD, the Signals Directorate. Now, what I will say is, talking to some of the people that I know behind the scenes, this actually goes a lot deeper than a lot of these articles are suggesting. Mr. Peter Williams, he worked at ASD with a PV clearance, positive vetting clearance. This is the highest level of classified security clearance that you can get in Australia. And he held that in the 2010s around cyber, signals, whatever, and now works in the private industry of that, but still, as far as my reading and knowledge goes, holding that clearance. Now, what I will say is I'm surprised no one's picked this up yet because the article goes through going, Mr. Williams this, Mr. Williams that, and everyone likes to think that I'm working for some foreign intelligence service, but they just can't figure out which one, and there's ones that are opposing. Maybe I'm the best, like, triple quad agent in the world, but the Australian and the connected agencies, especially within then Five Eyes and broader as well, they have been shocked by this, but there has been a huge increase in similar cases for many different countries in the past months and years too. And they are conducting massive internal reviews and previous work looking at a lot of that as well. So I think that was interesting to look over. Now, Tomahawks, there's a lot of misinformation around these today. So CNN, who's not known for any misinformation or trying to skew something one way, has released this article. The Pentagon has given the White House the green light to provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles after assessing it would not negatively impact US stockpiles, leaving the final political decision to President Trump. Of course, all this is saying that we think they could go, but ultimately this is still at the political decision. This does not mean that they are going, like many people are reporting. It does not mean that at all. But I don't think we're any closer to see them going. Trump's team, they're not assessing whether Tomahawks is going to then leave gaps in America's security. I don't think that is at all. What they're assessing, are Tomahawks more useful in a kinetic sense of striking and hitting oil refineries or this or that? Is it more useful like that, or is it more useful as an escalatory card to play? Going, well, we'll give Tomahawks if this. That will get blown up if you don't come to the table, if you don't talk to us on X, Y, and Z. And in my opinion, I think Tomahawks are more useful in the latter sense as a rung on the escalation ladder. Because the problem is, once that gets played, if it then doesn't have a decisive effect, I don't see beyond that what weapon systems the US is then going to then drum up in Ukraine and the US as the next wonder waff to then change the tide of the war. Either way, and we've spoken about this, if the preparations haven't already started on these weapon systems, even if agreed upon politically today, I doubt we'd see one in operation for minimum 6 months, realistically probably more like 18. And Miss Kavanagh, she has spoken on this. She's Senior Fellow and Director at Defence Priorities, formerly at Carnegie Endowment and Rand Corporation. She says the Joint Staff doesn't inform the White House on anything. The Joint Staff reports up the chain of command, and recommendations to the White House come from the Secretary of War. This is a misleading and misinformed story. I think Miss Kavanagh is a fantastic speaker on all things to do with this war and geopolitics. I'm still trying to get an interview with herself. If anyone can help me out with that. Also, I'm trying to get an interview with someone who disagrees on my assessments around Pokrovsk. I'm open to that. And anyone who says that I haven't been open, respectful, and willing to listen in interviews has never heard one of my interviews. My biggest weakness in interviews is actually not jumping on people when they say something, but I'm open to this. Okay, let's look at this sector. We'll talk about Pokrovsk and this Black Hawk mission. Of course, here's Ukraine center screen, the capital of Kyiv, red areas occupied since 2022, purple since 2014, and we are seeing what has gone from a crisis to catastrophe around Pokrovsk. You and me have been reporting on this for a while. We've been speaking about how this has been deteriorating, speaking about what is the worst case happening in here, and what we're seeing is actually similar to that. The Pokrovsk, if that comes under control, we've been speaking about this for months. Minograd down to the south is in big, big trouble. Okay, so what we saw today was this footage being shared everywhere. Broad daylight, watched by a drone, but this is a huge drone environment. This whole environment is saturated with drones, okay? Remember this. Broad daylight. What we see is, I believe, 11 operators coming out of this UH-60 Black Hawk into a field. These are said to be GUR Special Forces operators, and then running out and then taking up positions in nearby areas. We see the Black Hawk then leaving. Now, what I will say is these guys are brave than I. But the risk to these operators, the risk to that system, that very rare Black Hawk system, is incredibly large also. And when I first saw this, I thought, nah, this is either fake, old, or it's staged footage. But we need to look at geolocations and then videos that have come out following this. Why did I think that? Because I thought the risk to these assets, not just the platform can be replaced, but the assets of these operators with months and months, if not years of training and years of experience, are incredibly difficult to replace. And I think many people actually overestimate what special forces do and the capability, but maybe underestimate the force multiplication that can add to train up other forces too. This is what I spoke about with Wagner PMC, is Wagner itself, people overblew it or actually underplayed it as well between the actual operators and those used who have been recruited in. But then what I said, the real thing with this is when it went to Belarus to then train up the forces, and SF have a lot to do with that, but also limited mission set of infill, exfil, and targeting strike, etc., but very difficult to replace. That's why I thought this, I was like, what is this? Now, we see dropping around here. Now, what this is being reported as is GUR coming in to stabilise, retake behind the line on the E50 road to unblock Ukrainian forces in this direction. And again, difficult to get an idea because this doesn't seem like, I know people say there's 7 choppers in this. All I've seen is that, and everything in this war is filmed. But then there is footage released going around very quickly after this that appears to show the aftermath of this operation, with many operators getting struck by drones. And what I'll say is, watching this footage, and I hate watching footage like this, but the equipment, the location seems to line up. But if this is the case, if this is the mission we've seen take place, this is the outcome. I don't understand the planning of this mission, how it went forward, and risking these assets that you can't replace on the front line. Now, what it then made me think was, well, looking into where special forces actually work, rather than sort of unblocking in small areas, in small groups, drones, artillery, regular infantry to do this, was there some way to, is there some level of exfil that they're trying to do in here to pull someone back out, put a certain bit of equipment in, or pull a certain bit of equipment out? Again, it's very, very difficult to actually get an idea. But again, it's exactly like we spoke about yesterday, we spoken about previously, and what Karl von Clausewitz spoke of. The amount of losses that you can take on withdrawing and trying to save areas falling to can be dramatically more than in the defensive and offensive operations leading up to that, when retreat can turn to rout. And we can see trying to save then these areas. Mr. AMK Mapping, he shares this. He says, most or all of the Special Forces dropped off the US-60 Black Hawk helicopter were killed and wounded by Russian FPV drones as they attempted to entrench behind enemy lines. AMK, he also has an update just that went up when I started filming, showing geolocations of both that have occurred, the drop and then the targeting, and numbers also. So it's very interesting to see. I will say, I just do not understand this operation. I understand it in theory, given the nature of this war, the drones, the small man-pad systems, the air defense systems, artillery, all of this, I don't understand this whatsoever. Someone enlighten me, please, if you believe I'm incorrect. This actually reminds me of this interview, one of my most popular interviews I've done, called I Lost Everyone as of Regiment Soldier interview. You can go look this up. I'll put the link below, although it has actually been restricted and demonetized recently. Now, he explains in this how at Mariupol, Ukraine, by helicopter, did attempt to unblock this sector as well. And we did see then catastrophic consequence of this too. But the war has changed a hell of a lot since then. And the use case of drones, the efficiency has increased dramatically also. So this operation, I'll try and keep up to date with what has actually occurred, but dropping into this sector at the moment, this is not Call of Duty. Special Forces, at the end of the day, I know people like to imagine Special Forces are all 6'5" and bulletproof and this and that. Funny thing, most Special Forces are actually very short guys due to the weight that people have to carry. But artillery or a drone hitting a conscript to someone in Delta Force has the same outcome. So I don't get it. It seems like a desperate attempt at maybe trying to unblock this road. That's what it's being told as, putting massive elements at risk. And and this is the thing, that if we're going by people, actors, rational actors, the risk, it would be known of the extreme risk of putting that asset and these men at the front. What was the reward if it was to be successful? And we have to assume there was a balance in there. And that makes me think what was either trying to be unblocked to exfil out of here or put in, again, I don't know. I see many sharing this today, and I would say take this with a grain of salt that is massive. Now we hear this is from Ukrainian media. According to the source, geo-attack aircraft entered the areas of Pokrovsk. These areas are considered strategically important for Ukrainian logistics. They say several helicopters are involved in the operation. All we have is footage of one, maybe so. And this says Budanov is on site and is personally directing the operation. Of course, Kirill Budanov, the head of this service. And people saying that he's on site here. Now, firstly, I highly doubt this. And if he at the head is running on-the-ground operations, that micromanagement won't be as effective as it should be through typical chains. So take that with a grain of salt, but I'm seeing many Ukrainian pages share and suggest that this is the case also. Again, we don't know. Zelensky, he has said that Russia has concentrated 170,000 troops in and around Pokrovsk or near Pokrovsk. Now, in my opinion, this is likely a highly inflated number. Why? Well, you set the stage. Then if it does fall, you can go. Zelensky, I believe, said recently that the Russians outnumber the Ukrainians 8-1 in this sector. Now we see that figure of 170,000. You do this, you set the stage. So if and when it does fall, and I think it is when, not if now, then you could say, well, they outnumbered us 50-1, and that's why it did, but we killed 200-1. Again, we've talked about pseudo-environments, informational warfare. I know it's annoying, I know it annoys people, but again, it is part of warfare. So let's look at Pokrovsk what is actually happening around here will lose multiple sources. Of course, today we have the deep state map. You can see some red check heading then into Pokrovsk, the grey with, say, 70% of Pokrovsk, and as well, look at this grey zone heading right up into Hereshne as well. That's going to become relevant or more relevant as we go. And you can see for Krasny Yar, Lysivka, and Minograd, the situation even on this map, again, which is painting the best possible scenario of this, is looking like a catastrophe. Suryak shows this again. More movement to the northern aspect of Pokrovsk, or the northern extreme, that this is only, I think that's a zero, only 2 kilometers across from where Russia do then control territory. More movement in the eastern side and northern side of Minograd. More movement up then this E50 road to the west-northwest of then Pokrovsk and heading towards Hereshne as well. That he says that 70% is now under Russian control, not just grey, but under control. Let's have a look then at Mr. AMK mapping. Now he's showing fairly similar, well, very similar to Suryak. You can see these axes in here and then this map here. Now again, Hereshne, Minograd movement in the north and the eastern sector of this as well, down in that south, and that squeeze that is happening. And this is what we've been concerned about, is this opening in here, how to get those forces that are down in here then out. Let's look then at what AMK has said. He said situations, it's catastrophic. He estimates there is a bare minimum of 500 soldiers effectively cut off in and around Minograd. However, some successful withdrawals have taken place, designated by the blue arrows in here. Now, again, how many Ukrainians actually sit in here? Well, you'll see figures between a few hundred and 10,000. What do I think? I think it's still multiple hundred, likely low, maybe 500 to 1,000 in here. Again, if it's much less than that, we would have seen this moving much more quickly. In Pokrovsk city, they're capturing the northwestern industrial zone, as we can see, and infiltrating the stronghold village of Hereshne, where Ukraine's main defences are located. Again, like we have shown on the deep state, the grey heading out in here, and both Suryak and this map, movement in this direction. He does say the 32nd Mech Brigade was successfully withdrawn from northern Pokrovsk and are now deployed in Hereshne. This is the question. What will, if this falls, when this falls, where will that front line continue falling back to? And we don't know that yet. I know people saying it'll just go to the next line. That's not what played out in Velika, Avdiivka, or other sectors. The main Russian push on the axis has been towards the Ukrainian strong points southeast of Hereshne. The strong points were bombed by several FAB glide bombs, including a FAB 3000, completely destroying them. Russian soldiers are now attempting to cross the dam next to the reservoir and enter the tree lines where their strongholds are located. So Hereshne, try and getting in where these dams are located into this sector, and exactly like we have seen the Russians do in many different sectors. Click on my profile, watch the video where you have that hold with drones, destroy with FABs or other different types of artillery, DRGs break in, larger attacks following this, that hold, destroy, exploit that we do speak of. In the centre, Russian forces were able to clear the remaining pockets of Ukrainian resistance in this district and the centre. There's new areas that have been secured, and this is interesting. This is something I shared the other day and we saw footage. FPV drone pilots have been deployed to the central suburbs of Pokrovsk, while forward deployment accumulation points were set up in the southern suburbs, allowing significant increase in the supply of heavy weaponry and vehicles into the city. So we're able to accumulate, move in, but also those drones. This is something we have seen over the past couple of days, is drones not coming into Pokrovsk, but leaving from within Pokrovsk. Of course, high buildings, built up areas, everything from better electronic warfare coverage into areas, repeaters for drones, antennas for drones, and then pushing out across into this pocket between northern Pokrovsk, Krasny Liman, and that this is 2.79 kilometers best case by this map. Of course, that'll be covering attempted withdrawals out of this sector. The weather for the next couple of days looks like it may be clear. In southern Minograd, Ukrainian forces withdrew from their main defensive positions in the three-story buildings after being bombed by numerous FABs, with very few soldiers remaining in the southern suburbs. So trying to withdraw back out of here, and then we've seen where Russia has taken some of these areas. Others attempt to escape the pocket through small corridors of fields while being targeted by Russian arty and FPV drones. As a result, Russians were able to capture practically all of the southeast of Minograd, as you can see by this map here. In the northern suburbs of Minograd, Russian forces managed to dismount and enter the high-rise district there. They quickly gained a foothold and linked up with other forces. Again, you'll start seeing those drone operations too. Overall, the situation here remains catastrophic for the Ukrainian forces. My assessment is the same, has been the same for some time. They are finally beginning to withdraw from these two main cities, but troops are still stuck and many more will be killed attempting to escape the pocket. The fact the positions still exist in Lysivkia and Sukia over 14 kilometres deep into the pocket. He talks about this having, again, priority on PR rather than sound tactical decision. Down Krasny Yar, Lysivkia area, I tried to show this a bit yesterday, say there's an area down in here, got to move to here, and then out of here, you talk, sorry, this is not then working in that way for me with the measuring. Can I do this? No, not working. Anyway, he's correct on 14, 15 plus kilometres just to move out through this sector, let alone far beyond that as well. And that doesn't just mean withdrawal. That means trying to get anything in is also that same distance. Pokrovsk and Minograd are strategically important. That is true. Now, just because they may have lost their current strategic importance doesn't mean that it wasn't important and it won't be important in the future for a logistics hub also. And anyone telling you otherwise either doesn't know what they're talking about or is outright lying. True. The Ukrainian command has once again betrayed their troops, and those online lying about the true situation unfolding have done so as well. And I agree, those that are painting this is a great thing, blah, 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 I think is a betrayal to those who are in this sector. This is why I don't want too much media in there. There's a great quote on this. The truth has no defense against a fool determined to believe a lie. We see this more and more. Only time will tell what will happen after the fall of these cities. But it is known that Russia will gain a major logistical hub in the Donbass, which has undoubtedly helped significantly their future operations in this direction. Remember, all fronts feed into each other. Again, the holistic nature of a protracted attritional war like this, that it is all interlinked. Think of, if you're any aware of like string theory, that is somehow the holistic nature of a war like this, from very tactical actions on the front all the way through to diplomacy and politics. Right. We have one more update. You can see up on this northern sector where Ukraine has been having success pushing back on this. Again, it's because I think there's a priority into this pocket at the moment. But again, if there's a lot of forces up here who are having then success, who could be facilitating withdrawal out of here, again, you will get that idea. Again, Suryak mapping today, he showed that there is a lot of fighting and resistance in these areas as well. During the last 3 days, Ukraine army continued advancing south of Kushtiv Yar and west of Novoshakovka, putting Ukrainian army in difficult positions east of Shakovka. Meanwhile, despite the capture of Rodyansk, Russian forces continued clearing the last focus on the resistance groups. Some Ukrainian troops did not manage to withdraw from the town. So the Russians pushing in around Shakovka and Ukraine pushing then to the east then in this sector. Again, we'll see this sector develop over the next coming weeks, as particularly once Pokrovsk falls. Again, time frame this, I don't know, but I think once Pokrovsk fully comes under control, these other areas in here, I think if we don't see it used as a bargaining chip, I think we may see a slower fall than some are expecting, or maybe more quickly than others. But it will depend on the resistance, and never underestimate how long determined resistance in some areas can actually hold for. Think of Mariupol. Now, let's look at other areas on the maps. Let's look at Velika Novosilka, of course, the linear warfare bros' worst fucking nightmare. Pavlivka, Uspanivka, Russian advancements in this area. But to the north of here, this is what I'm interested in. See, Filia, Ivanivkia frontline, where this grey zone is growing, and the red zone as well. Okay, I saw someone say for Halloween I'm going as deep state. I'm going as the deep state map. So I'm gonna be all grey and not move much. I thought that was fucking funny. Not as funny as JD Vance's, but in the north here, this is very, very interesting. Suryak maps again. Take this. There's no confirmation of this, but he says on this front, last 8 days, Russian army began operations to capture the town of Novopavlivka and have managed to add into the southern part to the outskirts of the cemetery. New parts from Filia. So they've moved from Filia to the outskirts of Novopavlivka. Of course, this pocket that is developed around here, again, that doesn't meet our threshold, but it's interesting to have a look and see. Now, Oleksivka, as well as Danilivka, we need to look in this sector here. Apologies, I had to crop out to have a look to actually see the map on this. You can see movement to Novoluxandrivka and Danilivka and down to the south as this continues to grow. Exactly what we're spoken about. If you move one way, you need to move then in the two directions to your 90 degrees. So if you push west in this war, so you don't get vertically enveloped, you need to push north and south. We saw this happening around the Terney front day by day by day. Otherwise, because we talk about a vertical envelopment, this can happen. If the front line looks like this, it can happen and cut off like this too. But you also need to take into account this can happen not only for pockets, but when you have a knob heading out like this, you can then have this vertically enveloped like this here, and that goes into a significantly poor situation for everything from saturation of weapon systems through to logistics. Now, we have another update then around the Huliapol front line and the movement occurring in here as well. We see in the direction of Vesely more ground being made today by the Syriac map. Now, belt feed through the remainder of the maps. Now, this take with a grain of salt. Come down into Kherson region. Of course, a lot of pages have been saying that there's further control in Kherson. Now, Syriac, he says, situation in Kherson regarding Russian army took control over this island a week ago. The MOD announced this operation. They landed and have taken some areas, and the grey zone has expanded. So again, this is this sector in here that is in grey. Again, I would not be prepared to say that is red at this point in time, but keep an eye on it. Now let's move to Kupiansk. Now, we saw what Syriac's map showed yesterday that showed something like this down in the Kupiansk sector. Mr. AMK, he's showing very similar to this today down to Sadove region. That they've completed the capture of then the high rise, then down to the south and actually out to the east. And some groups have managed to push further. Positions are mixed with Ukrainians and Russians each sitting behind each other. So again, in this sector that has been enveloped in here, difficult to know what is actually happening. Russian soldiers were able to cross the Oskil from west Kupiansk, again, into residential areas there, of course. The Oskil that splits Kupiansk basically in two, movement on this eastern side in Zalskilia. So keep an eye out on all of that currently. And I think there'll be a lot more talk about this in the future. Let's make our way down. We have, of course, then the Liman front line. We see this in here, more movement into these areas as well. This is Stavke, and it is heading then into the breaking into the very eastern extreme of Liman, but also breaking in, coming on the northern side. Again, the grey zone in here shows fairly similar to this. Now, this is all part, of course, Liman, but also Siversk. And then Siversk South, we see a lot of mappers talking about this. This map not showing any of this, but we see Siversk South, this reservoir, so out into this sector, across to Zadnivkia, then further coming under control of the Russian forces, according to then the Syriac maps. Head down into another pocket that has formed on Konstantinivka. Now, has the grey zone actually increased in here? Yes, it has. So we see that too, then today, grey zone increasing. Look at Mr. Syriac maps. He's showing then further where this has exploited, but also down the road from Stopochke area, Shasivya area, as well as further movement down to the south to try and increase this around Novopavlivia area as well, but also that this Katarnivkia area has then come under control, which I would not be surprised by one bit. We'll come down last update before I leave you down into the southern Plavny Stepnohursk area. Again, there's been both Russian and Ukrainian ground being made in here on the east, the west, and then the north. Again, this area movement back and forth. Again, I think it is a very alternate axis for much movement at all, but keep an eye on it. We do see the grey zone growing. We do occasionally see it move back and forward, but this is in the direction of Zap. But both sides are then able to leverage off the Dnieper as well to fight on at least one less side. But again, the pressure down in these sectors around this will be an alternate, will be not the priority continue for then this movement that is heading to the west. What I am waiting on seeing is when this turns south on Huliapol and what I believe will be the envelopment of that area before a continued push west. But of course, this is much larger movements. But again, this is this whole area from Pokrovsk, Minograd, is once this falls, then Dobropilia, Drushkivka will become then primary next targets. And there'll be a lot of troops that freed up in here and equipment, both sides, to have further ongoing fighting. But as well, we need to remember that this is a war of attrition and it will be fought so. Okay, this is why we may not see areas closed up, and you will make decisions to lead into increasing your enemy's attrition. Legends, have a fantastic day. On this channel, as you know, there's zero tolerance, and we do not tolerate celebration of people fighting and dying. It is a horrible, horrible thing. Every single person on this front line is more brave than I. And anyone calling for further men to be poured into this, to be recruited, to be conscripted, to whoever, I'd say start with yourself. Legends, look after yourselves. Have a great day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.